pick up with Babylon 5 not long after the events of our last episode. The Star Furies are flying around the station, but not in anticipation of attack, to fire off space fireworks, which we picked up from a little shack right off the road. It's all part of the celebration. The Great War has come to an end, and now is the time to party like people who not long ago were fighting races of immortals who destroyed planets that were inconvenient, and somehow won. That's when you break out every drug there is. You ask Franklin if he can invent a few so that you can hold a scintillating conversation with your nipples. Sheridan puts on a bright public face, but in his private thoughts, he mourns what's lost and worries over what's still to come. In a sense, this is a harder enemy that they face. President Clark may be one man, but he's also the tip of a very ugly authoritarian iceberg. He didn't rise to power in a vacuum, and he's not some Lord Sauron whose minions are just born evil. Many times, good people will find a justification for why something that might be otherwise heinous is acceptable, even noble. And how do you weed that out? How do you separate those who have allowed themselves to be twisted into something ugly and don't even know it, from those who just are truly evil? How do you win over hearts and minds that have allowed themselves to think that all of this is all right? Because that's where this war needs to be fought. Anything else, and it's just like what we saw with Night Watch trying to take over. Remember that? Oh, we sorted that out, didn't we? We got them off the station, and yet they're still there. There's still those who are loyal to Clark on board, undermining things from within. We've seen them try things, and we haven't seen the last of them. Toppling Clark is an element, yes, but it's not so simple. Right now, one of those forces is our old friend Bester, or at least his position in Psi Corps that has been working hand in glove with Clark since before the election. One of the big cheeses says that they're working with Earth Force, Night Watch, and the Ministry of Peace in a new operation to deal with Babylon 5. The one good thing we've got going for us is that in an organization that insists on a false narrative, well, they can't be allowed to share secrets. The more you share secrets, the more something can leak. So they'll be pursuing a goal, but without knowledge of what the others are doing in pursuit of that goal. It's kind of like if D-Day was handled by the Marx Brothers. Bester comments on the counterproductive nature of this, but when you're authoritarian, incompetence is just baked in. After the titles, it's explained why a frontal assault will be no better than it had been the last time, that they're going to have to be more subtle, and Bester's going to be helping with their opening moves on that score. But with all this Earth stuff going on, let's not forget that as far as most of the aliens are concerned, the climax of this just came and went. So at the moment, Londo is trying to get the hell off Centauri Prime before someone gets the idea for him to be a warning from the gods over something or other. In the meantime, the toady that managed to survive Carpagio's mad reign gets the grand prize of being regent until such time as the crowning of the next emperor, whoever that wise, handsome, well-hung man might be. G'Kar, on the other hand, has to deal with the consequences of his imprisonment and that time that they gave him a Red Ryder BB gun. Now Dr. Franklin's got to look over his eye to figure out if this is serious. I mean, obviously, besides the fact that his eye is gone, infection, foreign debris. He prescribes some pain medication and then broaches the topic of cybernetic replacement, which G'Kar is all for. Give him that little glowing ability like the Terminator for whenever he gets mad. That fit him. After G'Kar explains that he turned down ruling his people because the cost just isn't worth it, we go to Garibaldi, who might be back, but there are still questions about what happened to him. And maybe now that Armageddon was called on account of rain, we can look at answering those.
Down. We ran a standard decode on it, but we couldn't find anything.
I put it through.
Well, why didn't you say so? That explains everything. Garibaldi deletes the transmission, although we get that it's more for secrecy than the fact that it's a big pile of nothing. He shows up late to the meeting of the senior staff, but he's brought a bombshell with him.
Well, there's no easy way to get to it, so I'll just say it. I've decided to resign as head of security, effective immediately.
They're convinced he's just under stress, but he insists he wants out while he still has his skin intact. The task before them is insurmountable. And while he doesn't have a better way than Sheridan's, that doesn't mean he thinks it's the right play, at least for him. And really, if his heart isn't in this anymore, then it would be better without him, as cold as that might sound. There's not room anymore for someone who isn't going to be giving 100%. Plus, he makes a valid point that if all they did was for the right to choose our own path, then no one can deny him this without undermining the cause that they purport to be fighting for. Damn values getting in the way of my pragmatism. Handling things at the moment is Zach, briefing the new people on how they handle things, like rotating people at customs, so they don't get burned out with all the weirdness that comes through.
Didn't think we'd be seeing you again anytime soon, Ambassador.
Yes, I gathered that from the look of unvarnished joy on your face when you saw me. Perhaps you'd like to sit down before you are overcome by ecstasy.
Well, at least that's over.
You never know who's gonna walk in the...
Just a guess, Mr. Allen, but I'd suggest the word you're looking for is door.
I'd be worried, Zach. Comedy comes in threes.
Look, I'm getting the hell out of here before anybody else walks through there. With my luck, it'll be the second coming.
Yeah, I don't think Jesus Christ is coming through that door.
Yeah, take over.
Although if you want to be technical, one of these would have to be the King of Kings. Meanwhile, as he's packing up, his quarters are for Chief of Security after all, G'Kar comes by, stone cold silent. Garibaldi knows that everything that happened to him, the torture, losing an eye, was because G'Kar went looking for Garibaldi, and it was all for nothing. But G'Kar is ecstatic, seeing it as a vindication that if you do the right thing, sometimes you get rewarded for it. Yeah, the bad things happened, but the thing he wanted the most, to see his people freed, has happened. And yes, he lost an eye, but it's an excuse to have 3 or 4 human girls dressed as nurses in his room. Victory all around! At the meeting, Zach is put in to replace Garibaldi, although he thinks something has to be wrong with him. Ever since getting back, he just hasn't been himself. What is running normally is ISN, who dutifully still report Clark's propaganda. In this case, that Earth Force is putting a quarantine of B5 in place in response to stories of potential terrorist attacks by Sheridan's forces. So that's nice. No longer getting any of the goodies from Earth we need, and we get called names. It's first the injury, then the insult with Clark. As his first official duty as security chief, Zach has to ask Lita to join them for the meeting with Bester. Make sure they're not scanned.
Zach, how come the only time people come to see me is when they want something from me?
And here she is, cosplaying as Black Widow, and nobody cares. So he lays it out there. The Vorlons aren't popular after their whole planet-destroying spree, and there are rumors that they changed Lita, so she makes people uncomfortable. But Zach's not put off by her, and in fact offers to come by later with pizza to help her set up her quarters now that she no longer has to live like she's in a 19th century prison. Oh, and we have one last thing to get out of the way. I can see something's bothering you. You have a glint in your socket.
My world is now free. You no longer exist in my universe. Pray that we never notice one another again.
That went better than I had hoped. Speaking of interpersonal discomfort, it's time for that meeting with Bester, who first objects to having a rogue telepath present, and then to be insulted that they put a P5 up against him. He doesn't realize that she's got some Vorlon upgrades, and no one is inclined to enlighten him. So he explains that Clark is freaked over the Shadow's leaving, as it cost him an ally while removing the thing distracting Sheridan from Earth. If he can't deal with Sheridan directly, Clark is going to have to undermine him, and Bester is prepared to explain the plan. For a price. He wants to go to Zahadum, see if there's an answer there that will let them free all of those frozen telepaths. While they discuss it, Bester tries scanning, but Lita F's him up with a smirk. Yeah, you thought this was Little League, but you ran up against Daryl Strawberry. I know that's a dated reference. I'm not really up on baseball. Anyway, he shares what he knows. The last jump gate between Earth and B5 is to be guarded by an Earth Force security patrol. Bester's job is to send in some of his own personally trained squadron of Psi Corps Star Furies to attack the patrol and make it look like Babylon 5 was responsible. There are probably some in the military who are sympathetic to this opposition of Clark. This would help destroy those sympathies. Ditto back home, as we'll get into later this week. What Clark really needs is a threat of just the right size, enough to think that there's danger out there, but a danger that could be stopped by Clark's government. You want them all to fall into line then. You gotta Goldilocks your outer space menace. Evil Dictator 101, people. On B5, while Garibaldi is trying to find the access codes for Zack now that he's taken over, he drags out of Zack what he thinks about what's happening, and he admits Garibaldi is making a mistake in his view. Garibaldi makes a fair point about the fact that you have to accept sometimes you're going to make a mistake. But he points to Zack himself, who on paper was a mistake for Garibaldi to hire. And now here he is, the new head of security.
And if I can be right about you, why can't I be right about me?
I just want to reiterate that Jerry Doyle was a tremendous asset for the show. From the beginning, he just got everything about it. It's hard to imagine a line ever coming out of his mouth that I didn't believe was coming from Garibaldi. He was the best kind of actor you could ask for in a show like this. The kind that never made you think he was saying lines, but just speaking his mind. Sheridan and Delenn have a nice moment on the White Star, but then it's back to the killing. The secret Psi-Score squadron has arrived and won't answer hails, but luckily Ivanova leads her own squadron through the gate to catch them from behind. Oh, how infuriating. What kind of a person ambushes a perfectly justifiable sneak attack? So while his own squadron is getting slaughtered because he sold them out, not criticizing, just noting it, he has to speak with Lita about how clearly powerful she's become since they met back on Earth.
In that case, Mr. Bester, I'm an orphan.
Not an orphan. Just a confused, frightened child who's run away and needs to be reminded where home is.
Wow, keep buttering her up. I'm sure this will pay off. So they arrive at Zahadum only to find that whoever was there and weren't the actual shadows are now hauling ass out of the system. Bester figures that must be good news, but Sheridan tells them, Amscray on the double. Yeah, the planet soon blows up. Imagine that. Well, if you like, you can come back later with a scoop and try sifting through the remains for answers, Bester. He takes a moment to monologue with his frozen girlfriend about all this.
Sheridan and the others, they're probably laughing right now. Well, that's all right. I still have an ace in the hole.
That's obvious. I imagine you have a complete royal flush tucked in your sleeves and a pair of loaded dice hidden up your ass. Sheridan stops by Lita's quarters to check up on her, and also to muse aloud that the timing of the evacuation and their arrival was astonishing. But there's the fact that the Shadows had the ability to sense Lita's probing the first time, which means that if she'd done the same thing again this time, that one way or another, that self-destruct would get triggered. There's a lot of reasons why she might do that, but maybe the best would be that Bester deserves to learn what suffering feels like. Whatever the reason, she couldn't tell anyone, including Sheridan, because Bester could find out from them. But while he might approve of that, he still can't let anyone around here make command-level decisions like blowing up planets. We should at least have a little bit of a powwow on that first. At the very least, it'd be good to know what those people who were left behind were getting up to. Epiphanies is fine. After the craziness that we have been through, it has to tap the brakes a bit. I realize how that sounds when we've seen a planet get blown up, but, there it is. I give it a stamp of somewhat important. While it does begin setting up the second act of the season, the majority of what you need to know is that Clark is upping the pressure and that B5 is now cut off. That will hang in the background for some time to come. I have to also praise the idea of having Zack to be the one to reach out to Lita during this. Remember that he was getting the sense that nobody wanted to be around him before they broke away from Earth because he was in Night Watch and they were becoming unpopular. So I think he's sympathetic to her situation. We'll talk about what's happening with Garibaldi later this week. Tomorrow, ISN proves things can always get worse.
All hail